Chapter 3. A Favor. A knock came on the bathroom door. I froze. "Yes?" Marv and I said at the same time, shooting each other sharp glances. Hopefully whoever it was hadn't overheard our conversation, especially the part about me having LYN. "Supper in 5, Pete said in his squeaky voice. Thank power, just the dinner call. But a sledgehammer dropped in my stomach. Not any dinner. The dinner. I grabbed the torch and Marv and I went downstairs. Our footsteps thudded deep and loud like those of destiny. Please tell us we'd won. Please tell us we'd won. It'd be a first, but anything was possible, especially since I'd gotten that whole closet full of precious VOs yesterday. Marv and I went into the living room, which connected to the dining room. The fire shed light in the large, bare area, but in the last few minutes, Pete had placed a few lit torches and sconces around the room to increase the light. Most of the boys, who were between 10 and 16 years old, already sat on the flimsy plastic chairs at the rickety wooden dining table, the only pieces of furniture in the room. Their faces were pale, but I couldn't see all of them, because a couple of kids had theirs buried in their hands. Normally they'd be shoveling the food into their mouths. Chunks of chicken sat untouched on a plate on the table. Jared shook his head, eyebrows pinched together. Despite the nerve-wracking occasion, the food manager was clearly not happy people weren't eating the chicken he'd tended to in the backyard coops. Strips of squirrel Marv had hunted sat on a plate next to the chicken. Today's offering from Jared's hydroponic greenhouse also lay on a large platter in the middle of the table, a bunch of different types of vegetables, tomatoes, potatoes, and a few others. My arm trembled as I plunged the rag end of the torch into the bucket of water by the fireplace, and the blaze died. I placed the torch next to the others that weren't being used. My heart raced at least 3 times its normal rate as I sat with Marv toward the end of the table, our usual spot. I couldn't help but notice his hand shook a little in his lap. The delicious scent of fresh-baked chicken and the smoky aroma of the torch I just doused mixed together and filled my nose. Jev, a thin boy about my height, with a face a darker gray than most in the group, since he was 16 years old like me, sat at the head. His face was expressionless. The faction leader, Jev, motivated everybody in the house and made sure they all did their jobs. His rumpled black suit and the dark patches under his eyes showed how seriously he took that duty. Or maybe that was because of the tournament results he just got. "Oh, Power, please tell me it's the news I've been waiting for." "As you all know," he said in a low, deliberate voice, "the results are in, so I won't make you wait any longer." He exhaled a short breath. "We placed second." The sledgehammer dropped out of my stomach and plunged through the wooden floorboards under my feet. That was it. Just like that. My life's dream, gone. A couple kids gasped. Some slumped their shoulders and dropped lower in their chairs. Others, like me, just stared at Jev. "Are you serious?" asked Rack, one of the Faction's 6 supply hunters. His fist hovered above the table as if he wanted to slam it down in frustration. "We placed second overall? As in number 2 in the whole stinking town?" "That's right," Jev said in his low, steady voice. "Out of all 312 factions." The room whirled. I could barely control my breath. You've got to be kidding me. My last year alive and my faction won second, which got us absolutely nothing. I'd rather we didn't even make the top 100 than get that agonizingly close. Not that that mattered. My life's dream was dust. I felt like banging my head against the table. I felt like grabbing the dishes of meat and throwing them across the room. But I didn't, because deep down I knew I couldn't give up. Not yet. Some way, somehow, I'd lay my eyes on that mansion. I'd find a way, even if it took my last 2 months to come up with the perfect plan. "How many points did we lose by?" Marv whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Little over 500, Jev said. Not a lot. We'd needed to find 2, maybe 3 more of the most precious VOs to beat the top faction, but they were real rare now. Thank power the DVD I hurled at the bully yesterday wouldn't have put us into first. I didn't think I'd have been able to live that down if I would've." "Even though we lost," Jev said in his calm voice, "I've got to say I'm very proud of you all." He looked around the room at each of us with a firm expression, a glow in his eyes. "You can't get much closer than that, though I know it is as disappointing as it is impressive." This time the silence stretched on for what had to be a whole minute. Place. Second place. Second. I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. Finally Jev gestured toward the table. "You might as well dig in." Nobody moved. Not even a decent meal on such a depressing day, said Dustin, the largest supply hunter, in a voice even gruffer than usual. He motioned a beefy hand at the plate of piled meat nearest him, a scowl on his wide, heavily bearded face. He was the only one of us who could grow that much scruff. Thanks to Marf's pitiful catch today, he glared up his sharp brown eyes at Marf down the length of the table from his spot by Jev. Marf snapped his head toward him. Hey man, I turn 16 next week. My body's not what it used to be. He'd been using that excuse a lot lately. Maybe it was partly true, but he'd always stunk at hunting. The only reason I continued to get so many precious VOs was because I'd gotten better at spotting them. Seemed every day I'd gotten slower at carrying them back to my faction house, thanks to the disease that ate away at me, making my limbs feel like they kept gaining more and more weight, and making me more and more tired in general. And it's not that bad. Marf's spittle flew across the room. At least I got 5 squirrels today. Here we go again. I'd be pretty angry if I was him, but he had to watch his temper, or at least his saliva output. Hey, watch my food! Trod, the second largest and strongest supply hunter, barked as he leaned forward. He sat directly across the table from Marf. The pathetic jerks. The boys always picked on Marf, but no doubt it'd be worse after a day like today. Leave him alone, I said with a raised voice. He did his job. If you say so. Dustin's voice sunk a couple of octaves. Trod eased himself back in his seat. Even though most of the kids didn't talk to me, they had a lot of respect for me, probably because I found the most precious VOs of all of them. When you think about it, at the end of the day, it was because of me we almost won this year, and everyone knew it. Enough, Jeb said. I might as well make my other announcement now. The patrol delivered a recent update to the VO list this afternoon. Great. Like I give a piece of flying horse crap after the latest depressing news. Jev pulled a folded-up yellowed piece of paper from his pocket. There's a new object on top of the list. Books are still way up there, but this one now rakes in 400 prestige points. Holy power! That was a lot, but it didn't matter to me anymore. I had to find a way to get to that mansion. That was what I had to do. I didn't even know what it looked like, but it'd probably be easy enough to spot. According to rumors, it was this enormous building made of white limestone. I found myself rubbing my hands together. I had to see the manor. I just had to. What? 400? An incredulous expression hung from Nez's face. Another supply hunter, Nez was deceptively strong for someone of average size. Although I'd never seen him carry stuff out in town, he was Pete's go-to guy whenever Pete wanted any of the faction's heavy furniture rearranged. That's ridiculous! Rack had a similar dazed look. That's twice as many as for a book. Jev unfolded the paper and held it up for everyone to see. This is what they want most now. Somebody, one of the Battleluxes probably, had drawn a rectangle on the paper with a pen. 2 thin lines extended from it and attached to 2 much smaller rectangles. The lines were probably supposed to be wires. I'd seen them on similar objects that were always worth a bunch of prestige points. Some word was scrawled on the large rectangle. I had no clue what it meant or how to say it, but I committed it to memory anyway. Even though I wouldn't be around for next year's tournament's results, I still had to find precious VOs or the rest of my faction would be furious with me. I continued to stare at the word on the object, forced it to keep running through my head until I'd ingrained exactly how it looked into it. Nintendo, Nintendo, Nintendo. It was definitely familiar. I'd seen it on other VOs like this one. See that word there? Jev asked. Supposedly that's the name of some old world company that had a lot to do with creating, or providing, I should say, power. Of course. The rulers had said that about a ton of objects over the years. They always want VOs they thought might have something to do with power. Still, I inhaled sharply. According to the lessons the Razors taught us, power made the old world run. It made machines work, and cars move without horses having to drag them. Some seriously awesome stuff. The rulers say this object will bring them even closer to rediscovering power, Jeb said, eyes wide and bright. No doubt he wanted us to all get excited about it. They also say this device is very old compared to the ones like it, so keep that in mind when you look for it. We're on it. Dustin shot me, Trot, Rack, Nez, and the hulking, though always silent, Kron each a stern look, since we were the faction's supply hunters. Funny how they were so energetic all of a sudden, like how Jev wanted. Then again, they each had at least another year to win the tournament. So luckily, I gave Dustin the most determined look I could muster. Thankfully, he seemed to buy it. That's it for the announcements, Jev said, and everybody finally dug into the meal. I forced a couple of chunks of squirrel down my throat. After we all finished, we piled our dishes on the kitchen counter and moved to the living room to play backgammon, chess, checkers, or cards, the only VOs we were allowed to keep for some reason. Probably so we didn't die of boredom, though they kept me right at the edge. The faction had a set of each game on a shelf in the painfully dull room. As usual, Marf and I grabbed the dog-eared set of cards and sat in a corner of the room on more flimsy plastic chairs with a fold-out table between them, our typical spot. Everybody was uncharacteristically quiet. The only sound was the clink of dishes from the kitchen as Pete washed them. Jev, expressionless, stood by the room's entrance and watched everybody, as if making sure we were all having fun. What a prude. As Marv and I played Crazy Eights, I tried to think of some way to get into the mansion. It was illegal to come within sight of the place unless you were a faction leader, and the patrol heavily enforced that on the roads. Even if you were the housekeeper transporting VOs, the guards stopped you at the gate and brought them the rest of the way themselves. But there had to be a way, and the sooner I got to the mansion, the better. My time in this horrific world was running flat out. When my brain fried from thinking too hard and getting nowhere, my gaze wandered to the large photograph that hung over the mantel by the fireplace. No clue why our faction got to keep that VO either, though I always thought it was the most fascinating object we had. The rulers probably let us have it for motivation, so as to keep us working hard in the hopes that one day life will be as nice as it looks in the photo. It portrayed extremely realistically what looked like a family of 4 from the old world, back when everybody was part of a family, not like now when a faction was your family, except for the Badeluxes, that is. It made sense, though. Today's age wasn't like the old world, which had power, an almighty force that made it way easier to live, with what being able to heat up food, wash your clothes, and get to and from work a lot more quickly. Now that I thought about it, power must have given people a lot of extra time, enough to hang out with the opposite sex at least. The photograph was pretty priceless, though. 2 kids, a boy about 10 years old, if I'd a guess, and a girl about 13, stood in front of their parents by the swing set in the background. Since then, the set had been replaced with chicken coops, and the outhouse now stood next to it. The back lawn's grass was extremely short back then, but had grown so long it now folded over. The parents smiled, the brightest of everybody in the photo, mirroring that of the clothes they and their kids wore. Amazing how vibrant garments were back then, and not a single hole or patch to boot. Although the parents gazed at the camera, their faces were turned slightly toward each other, as if they were sharing a secret, loving smile, too. The father had his arm wrapped tightly around the mother's waist. Rumor had it guys and girls could form the strongest bonds of all with each other, stronger than members of the same sex, and that in the old world they formed what were called relationships that eventually led to families. I never really believed the rumors, though, until that short amount of time I spent with Stasha outside the reproduction faction. A longing feeling settled over me, so I focused on the photo again. Judging by how tall and filled out the parents looked, they must have been real old. Well, to us. No way I would have been able to guess how many years. No matter how much I thought about the idea, I could never wrap my head around it. What would it be like to live that long? Legend had it the average person back then lived to about 80 years old, or even more. 80! I couldn't even imagine that. No way I'd want to live that long, though. Not like this, anyway. But in the old world, a whole different place with knowledge we could only dream about, that we could only try to uncover. Well, that the Bad Deluxe family could only try to uncover. With 2 months to live and no way to read and no VOs to study other than the ones in my mattress or left in town, there wasn't much else I could do or learn. Unless I found a way to check out the mansion as soon as I could. I looked up from my cards and spotted the answer. He'd been sitting right in front of me this whole time. How could I have been so stupid? "Marv," I whispered, "I've got to ask a favor of you when we're in our room." A sour expression melted onto his face as he slapped down and ate. Why do I have the feeling I'm not going to like this? A couple hours later, Jev announced it was time for everybody to go to sleep. Marv and I tied in the number of games we won. We all headed upstairs as quiet as we'd been the whole evening. Marv and I navigated our pitch-black room by the landing and sagged into our beds. I wrapped my blanket tightly around me because a serious night chill had settled in. "Well?" Marv's voice drifted from the darkness. "This had better be good after such an awful day." I took a deep breath. "You've got to help me get to the mansion. Tonight."